All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive on Xi Jinping and try to understand this guy who's leading China, shaping its future, and probably, honestly, a lot of the globe's future, too.
Yeah.
It's a pretty broad overview of his life.
Yeah, it's a great starting point, I think, for a figure like Xi Jinping. It really lays out his whole journey, and his beginnings are pretty unexpected when you think about where he ended up.
I know, right? His journey is full of these crazy twists and turns. Like, did you know that this guy lived in a cave dwelling for 7 years? I had no idea.
It's such a wild detail. This is during the Cultural Revolution. Things were super intense in China politically. His father was a pretty high up Communist Party official, and he got purged. So Xi Jinping was just a teenager at the time, and they sent him to this really remote village called Liangjiahe.
So he went from, a pretty privileged life to living in a yadong, basically a cave dwelling, for 7 years.
Yeah, totally. No running water, barely any electricity. It's a huge difference from his life back in Beijing. You have to imagine, the kind of impact that had on him as a young guy.
It's hard to wrap your head around. Talk about resilience. The guy applied to join the Communist Party 10 times before they finally accepted him.
It really shows his persistence, for sure. Especially because, they labeled him a class enemy at first, his dad's situation and all. So he had to really overcome a lot of prejudice and prove he was loyal to the party.
One thing I found really interesting, she studied chemical engineering in college. It's not really the typical background you think of for a national leader.
Yeah, you don't see that every day, right?
Right.
It says a lot about what was going on politically back then. The Cultural Revolution had really messed with the education system. She got into Tsinghua University as a worker peasant soldier student, so he had to work while he was studying. A lot of people did that during that time.
Do you think that engineering background shaped how he leads it all?
It's a really good question. Did it make him more of a problem solver? More focused on efficiency and, getting things done? It's definitely worth thinking about as we look at his leadership style later.
Okay, so we've got this young Xi Jinping, shaped by some pretty unique experiences. How does he go from living in a cave to, the halls of power?
Well, his political climb is pretty interesting on its own. He starts out in local government, holds a few positions in Hebei province, then he moves to the coast, Fujian and Zhejiang provinces. Those positions gave him a lot of experience in economic management.
And he ends up as governor of Zhejiang, right?
Yeah.
That's where he really starts to make a name for himself.
Yeah, that's when people started to notice him. The way he handled corruption in Zhejiang caught the eye of some of the top people in the party. He didn't mess around, went after high-ranking officials and lower-level party members. It gave him a reputation for being straightforward. Tough, even.
So he's building this track record, showing what he can do as a leader.
Yeah.
What's the next step for him?
Well, in 2007, he gets appointed party secretary of Shanghai. It's a huge promotion. Basically puts him in charge of China's financial center. And it happened right before a big political transition. Everyone was watching to see who was going to take over from Hu Jintao, as the next paramount leader.
And Xi totally delivers. He gets elected to the Politburo Standing Committee that same year. Top level of the Communist Party.
Right, and his ranking within the committee was a pretty clear sign that he was the front runner. They also gave him some important jobs, overseeing the 2008 Beijing Olympics, handling stuff with Hong Kong and Macau, and he became president of the Central Party School, basically getting him ready for the top spot.
So by 2012, the transition happens. Xi Jinping becomes General Secretary of the Communist Party and Chairman of the Central Military Commission.
And that made him the paramount leader of China, the first from the generation born after they founded the People's Republic.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy when you think about where he started. But the big question is, what kind of leader does he turn out to be? How is he different from the leaders who came before him?
To understand that, we need to look at this idea of collective leadership. That's what they were doing in China after Mao Zedong died. Right.
Yeah, so collective leadership. Basically, after everything that went down with Mao, all the chaos and, his personality cult and all that, the Communist Party wanted to make sure that they didn't have another single, all-powerful leader. So they came up with a system where the power was spread out among the top leaders.
So it's like they were trying to prevent another Mao situation and make sure there were some checks and balances in place.
Exactly. It was supposed to protect against any one person having too much power.
But it seems like Xi Jinping has kind of moved away from that model, hasn't he?
He has. Yeah. Since he came to power, he's been steadily consolidating his authority. He's become the clear center of power in the Chinese leadership.
We've talked about the anti-corruption campaign.
Yeah.
Targeting both high-level officials and low-level party members, the tigers and flies, as they call them. Do you think that was part of his strategy to consolidate power? I think it definitely played a role. By going after corrupt officials, he could get rid of potential rivals and put his own people in key positions.
It also makes him look really strong and decisive, someone who's willing to take on the establishment.
Exactly.
But even though it was popular because it tackled corruption, there were some concerns about how it was done right.
There were definitely some concerns about transparency and whether everyone was getting a fair trial.
Yeah, and due process.
Critics argued that there weren't proper legal procedures and that it was being used to silence people who disagreed with Xi and get rid of political opponents.
And the lack of transparency made things even worse.
Definitely fueled a lot of rumors and speculation,
Oh, yeah.
created this atmosphere of fear within the party.
And along with the anti-corruption campaign, we've also seen a huge increase in censorship and surveillance under Xi.
Yeah, it's been pretty dramatic. He's really tightened his control over information.
It seems like he's really prioritizing national security.
That's definitely been a major focus for him. We've seen stricter control of the media, more monitoring of what people are doing online, and crackdowns on any kind of dissent or criticism.
The Great Firewall is even harder to get around now.
It is, and they're using new technology to keep tabs on what people are doing, where they're going, all of that.
So what do people outside of China think about all this? We talk about his image within China, but what about globally?
Well, it really depends on who you ask. There are some pretty different views out there. In the West, especially in the US, he's often portrayed as an authoritarian figure.
Yeah.
Someone who's a threat to democracy and the liberal world order.
It's easy to see why they would see him that way.
Yeah.
The crackdown in Hong Kong, the situation in Xinjiang, his foreign policy in places like the South China Sea. It all kind of paints this picture of China becoming more powerful and maybe even aggressive under his leadership.
Right, and you'll often hear comparisons to other strongman leaders like Putin, which reinforces that image of Xi as someone who's challenging Western values and interests.
But I imagine the view is pretty different in other parts of the world, especially in developing countries.
Oh, definitely. In a lot of African, Asian, and Latin American countries, he's seen as a strong and effective leader, someone who's lifted millions of people out of poverty and who's standing up to the West.
Right.
His Belt and Road Initiative is a good example. A lot of countries see it as a way to get much-needed investment in infrastructure.
So they're taking a more practical view.
Yeah, they're less focused on China's political system and more interested in what they can gain economically from having a good relationship with China.
It just goes to show that global perceptions are really complicated.
They are.
They're shaped by a lot of different factors. Economic interests, historical ties, geopolitical alignments.
Exactly.
There's no one-size-fits-all view of Xi Jinping or China.
You know, one thing that surprised me while we were researching this, I found some stuff about his personal life that was actually pretty relatable.
Yeah.
Did you know he's a huge soccer fan? I did. It's kind of cute, actually. He's talked about how much he loves the sport. He even said he wants China to become a soccer superpower one day. He's met with famous players like David Beckham.
It's funny to think about. This incredibly powerful guy getting excited about a game just like anyone else.
It definitely makes him seem more human.
It does. And he loves to read, too.
Yeah.
I was surprised to learn that he has a ton of books by Western authors, like Hemingway and Tolstoy.
And I read somewhere that he even likes Game of Thrones.
No way.
Can you imagine him talking about the show with other world leaders?
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
It's like this little glimpse into his intellectual side.
Yeah.
His love for stories.
Maybe a way to escape from all the politics for a bit.
And speaking of stories, it's interesting how they built this narrative around his life. You know, the classic rags to riches story.
Oh, yeah.
From a cave dwelling to the most powerful man in China.
It's a powerful story, and it resonates with a lot of people in China.
It's like the idea that anyone can achieve success if they work hard and never give up.
Exactly. And it fits perfectly with the whole Chinese dream idea that she has been promoting.
It's a very deliberate message, for sure.
It is.
Designed to inspire people and make Xi look like the embodiment of that dream.
Right.
And then there's his family life. He's married to Peng Liyuan. She's a pretty big deal in China, too.
Oh, yeah. She's incredibly popular. She was already a famous folk singer before she became leader.
They always seem so happy together at public events.
It's true.
State media loves to show them as this loving and supportive couple. It's pretty different from the previous first ladies.
Yeah, they were much more private.
And they have a daughter, Xi Mingzhe. She went to Harvard, right?
She did, but she used a fake name to keep a low profile.
I can't even imagine what it would be like to be Xi Jinping's daughter.
Yeah.
All that pressure and attention. So we've got the soccer fan, the bookworm, the family man. All these little details make Xi Jinping seem more like a real person. It's easy to get caught up in the politics and policies. But it's important to remember that even the most powerful people have lives outside of all that.
Absolutely.
And in Xi's case, those personal experiences, like his time during the Cultural Revolution, his education, even his hobbies, they might help us understand his worldview and how he approaches leadership.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how his personal life affects his decisions as a leader. But we can't forget that he's running a country with some pretty serious problems to deal with. Right?
Oh, for sure. He's got to navigate some really tricky stuff. I mean, China's going through this huge economic and social transformation. And there's a ton of geopolitical tension, too.
Let's break that down a little, starting with the economy. China's economic growth has been slowing down.
Yeah.
And there are worries about things like rising debt, a possible property bubble,
Right.
not to mention the trade war with the U.S.
All big challenges.
What's Xi Jinping doing about all that? Well, he's been trying to shift China away from relying so much on exports and focus more on domestic consumption. It's a tough balancing act, though. He needs to keep the economy growing to keep people happy and employed. But he's also got to manage all those risks so things don't blow up in the long run.
It's like walking a tightrope.
Yeah.
And then you've got the whole social side of things, too. China's population is getting older really fast,
It is.
which puts a lot of pressure on things like Social Security and healthcare.
Yeah, it's a major demographic shift.
We talked about how they relaxed the one-child policy
Right.
and then eventually got rid of family size limits altogether.
But it's still unclear if that's going to be enough to deal with the problems of an aging population.
And it's not just the aging population. There's also a lot of inequality in China. Xi Jinping has been trying to address that with his Common Prosperity campaign. But how do you reduce inequality while also keeping China competitive globally?
That's the million-dollar question. It's a tough needle to thread.
And we can't forget about the environmental issues either. China's the biggest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world.
Right.
They've got problems with pollution and running out of resources. I mean, we all heard about the smog in Chinese cities.
It's pretty bad in some places.
And there are water shortages too.
Yeah, definitely.
So what's Xi Jinping's plan for all that?
Well, he's made some big promises about tackling climate change, like aiming to make China carbon neutral by 2060.
That's a huge goal,
It is. It would require a massive shift away from coal.
which is still a major source of energy for them.
Exactly. It's a big challenge.
So yeah, domestically, he's got a lot on his plate.
Yep.
But like you said, there are major international challenges too.
Oh, yeah. The U.S.-China rivalry is a big one. It affects everything. Trade, technology, security, even ideology.
And of course, there's the whole situation with Taiwan,
Right.
which China claims is its own territory. That's a potential flashpoint for sure. It feels like things have been getting more tense over Taiwan lately.
They have.
What's Xi Jinping's position on all that?
He's been pretty clear that he sees reunification with Taiwan as a top priority. He's even hinted that he wants to see it happen before he dies.
Wow.
And China's definitely been flexing its military muscles around the island. It's a very delicate situation that could escalate really quickly.
And we have to talk about the human rights issues too,
Yeah,
especially the situation in Xinjiang.
Yeah.
That's been condemned by a lot of countries.
it has. The way they're treating the Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities is a major diplomatic problem for Xi Jinping. He wants to present China as a responsible global power, but what's happening in Xinjiang contradicts that image. It creates tension with Western countries and raises questions about whether China really cares about human rights.
So we've got economic uncertainty, social problems, environmental concerns, geopolitical rivalries, human rights abuses. It's a lot for any leader to deal with.
It really is. It's a massive test of leadership.
How Xi Jinping handles all this will determine how he goes down in history. It's kind of too early to say for sure how he'll be judged,
Yeah.
but what are some possible scenarios?
Well, if he can keep things stable in China, keep the economy growing, and successfully project China's power on the world stage, he could end up being seen as a transformative leader, someone who made China a true global superpower.
But if things go south,
Yeah.
like if there's an economic crisis or a major conflict or even unrest within China, his legacy could be very different.
It could be.
He might be seen as someone who overreached, who tried to do too much too fast.
It's a good reminder that even the most powerful people are ultimately judged by what they achieve. Can they handle incredibly complex situations and get results?
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Xi Jinping, I think the main takeaway is that we all need to be paying attention to what's happening in China.
I agree. What happens there affects everyone. You can't ignore it.
From economic trends to geopolitical shift, from technology to human rights, the decisions Xi Jinping makes, the challenges he faces, and the legacy he leaves behind, it's all going to have a huge impact on all of us.
So stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions, because if you want to understand the world we're living in and the world we're heading towards, you got to understand Xi Jinping.